I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, I'm your host, Matt Dixon. And today is part one of two conversations that I'm going to have with nutrition expert Scott Tindal. Scott is the co-founder of Fuelin, a partner of Purple Patch in the big realm of nutrition and fueling, and is, by all accounts, a world expert in nutrition. His origins started off in professional rugby. He went to Britain. He worked with British Rowing and various organisations over there. He then went on to Toronto in Canada to work with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the very large NHL team, of course. And about 8 years ago, he dabbled in triathlon, starting to work with professional athlete Sarah Piampiano. Many of you guys will be familiar with Sarah, as she was a long-time Purple Patch pro. And from there, Scott got together with Jonathan Lee, the founder of Fuelin, and together they have built up one of the most dominant and most influential resources and apps, educational apps for fueling and nutrition across endurance sports. And I invited Scott back to the show today to have a discussion around fueling and athletes. Scott was recently at the Hawaii IRONMAN World Championship, so I thought it would be fun to get him on the show and have a little bit of a coach's chinwag. We go through various aspects today, starting to unpack why it is very, very different so far as caloric needs if you are a lower level amateur athlete relative to what the peers are doing. You don't need to consume as many calories. We also get some of Scott's insights around the professional sport in Kona, and we unpack the reasons behind that Christian Blumenfeld throw-up that so many of you would have seen on the course in Hawaii. It's a tremendously entertaining conversation. It's very simple. It's getting a lovely chance to welcome Scott and I in person to have a nice conversation. And then in part two of the show, we're going to broaden our perspective on nutrition and performance. And we're going to talk about athletes, people and individuals that are looking to up level over the course of 2025. We unpack some of the recommendations of what you can do as an athlete right now with your eating habits to help set you up for a great year ahead. We also discuss the important elements if you're looking to improve your body composition. And finally, we talk about longevity and daily energy and what are the key elements to help you drive your performance on a day-to-day basis. That's in part two. But today, it's all about athletes, Kona, and, well, a coach's conversation in nutrition. It's a lot of fun. As ever, this is ad-free, promo-free. If you want to continue discussion, if you want to get a hold of either the team at Fuelin or at Purple Patch, info@purplepatchfitness.com. You can find the Fuelin team at fuelin.com. That's fuelin.com/purplepatch. And you can find all of the Purple Patch programming at purplepatchfitness.com. But until now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Scott Tindal to the show. It is the meat and potatoes. All right, it is the meat and potatoes. And once again, our star guest, we are in person. Lovely to have you back on the show. Scott Tindal, co-founder of Fuelin. Welcome once again.
Thanks, Matty.
It's good to see you.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
It's good. We are bunched together. We're going to share this space, and it feels a bit weird for you guys that are watching the show rather than listening to the show. When I first met Scott, it was intimidation on his bulk and his size. And
what are you saying? What are you saying? I'm shrinking.
You are a shrinking man. The only thing I would say that you've still got me on for sure is, well, let's just check. Yeah, I think
definitely got you.
There is a wet noodle coming out of my t-shirt, and that's my arm. I need to get into the Purple Patch strength, and you are still a man of steel. But good to have you here in person.
Yes, thanks for that intro. I have been described as little Tyndall these days by my friends. So
There you go.
a shrinking violet, I think. All
Well,
this endurance exercise.
and yeah, it's good. It's good
an
for you.
interesting.
Good for the soul. Good for the brain, for sure. But yeah, you've been doing half Ironman racing. You're doing marathons now. It's been a journey for you, huh?
Yeah, I guess that's all part of the Fuelin journey, isn't it? Into what we've created, and I guess experiential learning is something that I often bang on about, and so I guess throwing yourself into the mix with endurance sports is probably part of it. And yeah, it's certainly been a journey for me, and
Yeah.
I think learning about training
Yeah.
first and foremost through you and other coaches, and then certainly putting into practice our philosophy of Fuelin into play and
Living it.
learning and living it, and yeah, experiencing it. So it's
Let
good.
me ask you: are you enjoying the journey?
I love it.
Great. Yeah.
I even had a period of time where I wasn't actually enjoying lifting weights that much, and so it's been a big shift. But after this next marathon, I said I'm just going back to the gym, and I'm going to lift a lot of heavy things and get some size back. So that's
Fantastic.
the
Good
plan.
stuff. Well, what we're going to focus on, we're going to do a couple of these episodes we're going to record. And today we're going to focus mostly around the Hawaii Ironman World Championships. You just returned. I was not there. I was in Orlando, Florida, of all places, working with a leadership team there. So I, for the first time in many years, missed the Hawaii race this year. But it was a spectacular race. But obviously, we want to have a conversation anchored more in the fueling and nutrition side, and some of your observations as an expert in nutrition. But before we dive into that, should be an interesting show, and certainly me watching it as a spectator, I certainly gathered a few of my own observations. So I'm interested to hear what you think of what I'm going to say as well. But I'd love to check in on Fuelin and how it's going for you guys as a team. For context, for you listeners, if you don't know, your co-founder Jonathan Lee is a long-time Purple Patch athlete. So I've got to be a little bit of a passenger on the journey so far of Fuelin from really Jonathan's idea, collaborating with yourself, you building up really what has now become the major nutrition and fueling brand in the sport, so far as nutrition coaching. And so, where do we find you now as a team in Fuelin? Where are you guys? And I'd love to know what your plans are for the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Jonathan. I still think back. I was traveling through Bosnia Herzegovina, and Jonathan sent me an app at the time which had a panda falling off a box, rolling down a hill, and it still sticks with my mind. And obviously, you would have seen, or you may have seen, and the listeners may have seen the Fuelin unicorns
Yeah,
at Kona,
yeah.
and it's gone from 1 to 2 to we had 4 there this year, and it's all very funny. And the reason for that, from evolution was I stitched up Jonathan to put on the Fuelin unicorn outfit and go behind Jan Frodeno, who was handing out water on Palani back in 2022 because he was injured.
Yeah.
And we obviously didn't know Jan. Well, I didn't know Jan at the time. So that video went viral. Then, Jan ended up reaching out to me. I started working with Jan. Jan then ends up investing in Fuelin, and now he's our chief performance officer. So it's funny how things go in circles and how life happens. And, that fateful day of just, saying, well, let's try and get some views on Instagram. It worked out pretty well in the end. So look, it's, as you say, it's been a journey, where we are. And we made this comment. Jordan Blanco was talking. She sent me a lovely message and she said, wow, look how far you've come.
Yeah.
When, I did a recent podcast with Jan and Daniela in Kona, and, to have the opportunity to work with and speak to, the goats of the sport. Like,
for sure.
I sort of pinch myself and think, wow, how did I get to here? And that's certainly exciting. And I think there's a lot to come. So you asked what's to come. Obviously, we're very happy with, the number of athletes who are using the platform and the partners we've got from teams like yourself, coaches like yourself, extending from their platforms from Training Peaks to TriDot, to Final Surge and soon to be Humango, which I think is really exciting. And we're just broadening that integration, Garmin direct integration with those now. That's now live. And then I think we'll build out those integrations. I've talked to you many times from Aura to Whoop. As we start to build that in, athletes want to see that. They want to see how does sleep, how does their heart rate, HRV, how does that relate to or correlate to nutrition? And I think from my perspective, nutrition, and I think this is what we're doing very differently, is I think a lot of people position, sleep in its own silo.
Yeah, mutually
training
exclusive.
in its mutually exclusive silo. But if you think about it, nutrition is actually the one thing that is central to everything.
Yep.
And there's this bi-directional relationship, which again, a lot of people, I don't know whether they don't think about it or they fail to acknowledge it. They don't see that relationship between, say, food and sleep. Now, if you eat poorly, you can have poor sleep. If you have poor sleep, you can eat poorly. Same training.
Yep.
If you don't train, you probably have a likelihood just to go, oh, I'll eat whatever. You start training and it starts to create this sort of switch. It flicks the switch in your brain, doesn't it? Where it says, you say, you know what? I just did some training. Maybe I don't feel like a burger.
Yep.
Maybe I feel like eating some salad, some good quality protein, plant or animal. And so again, there's that relationship. You eat well, you probably go, you know what? I feel healthy. I'm going to train. And that's cool.
It's an interesting, like we always talk about the performance base layer and actually creating, when you have your, pardon the pun, performance recipe, it creates a weave of a really robust platform, a great sort of fabric of performance. When you think about how those cascade, keystone habits, where quite often we're doing a lot of work at the moment with leadership teams, mostly for folks that are sedentary or really struggling just to get movement into their life.
Yeah.
And quite often we don't actually start, interestingly, with nutrition, because a lot of folks are just getting 3,000 steps a day, which of course is a direct cause to all cause mobility. But when you start to progress people along the continuum and they start to move more, they feel a little success, and then they are ready to actually think about, oh, maybe I want to think about what I'm eating here. And maybe I want to think about sleep, etc. And it's when you can get the unlock of really basic habits around nutrition that you start to see the vortex occur of better energy, better, more robust immune system, all of these components, better cognitive function. So always right at the center is nutrition. It does relate to every aspect. So
I think that is exciting. Like when we framework that and we start to build these connections, and that's what we're now doing, I think we're starting to see athletes get that, oh, okay, I get it. And then it becomes this, oh, maybe it's not just about races.
Exactly.
Maybe this is about life. And I always laugh when athletes go, I got no more races now. Oh, I don't need nutrition. I'm like, what, you're not going to eat?
Yeah.
Like, just because you don't have a race doesn't mean you can't eat well. And so, and I know we're going to get into that later, but that's probably something that we're really working on now. Yeah. How do we create, again, that engagement? How do you think about maybe blocks throughout the year? Yes, you've got racing blocks, but then you've got off-season blocks. You've got, change in focus. Like I said, now after the marathon, I'm just probably going to reduce the running volume, lift weights, change my focus to putting on some size, maybe, focus on that. And that's going to revolve around nutrition, because I'm going to have to take in probably more calories.
Yep.
Probably adjust the macronutrient split, but be very aware of that. And so that's certainly a key focus. I think the other really interesting things that we've got, new app dropping, should be November.
So really soon.
UX, UI completely changed, much more intuitive, more focus on giving easier visibility over some data, building in more and more AI into it to provide, again, more feedback. The food tracking remains as good as ever, or I think the best currently on offer in terms of being able to just speak casually to Scooter, our AI food tracker, and just saying, exactly what you had for breakfast. I said, I had breakfast this morning and I'm playing catch up on eating after being in Kona, which I know sounds funny, but I was on my feet the whole time and probably did a bit too much. So this morning was sort of, two 2 hits of protein in a drink after a run with milk, slice of sourdough, 2 eggs, 2 handfuls of baby spinach, handful of blueberries. And I just literally said that to Scooter, and it just logged everything. And obviously, from that ease and practicality perspective, that's what we're really focusing on now with Fuelin.
It doesn't do the dishes as well, does it?
Unfortunately,
No,
not
yet.
I just gave that to Jordan.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's very important. Well, it's by the way, your challenges are the same for any coach, where folks finish their last race and then they think they're done, and then they come back 6 months later and they repeat the pattern. But listeners to this show know all about that, because I've been talking about it for many, many months and are on that side. I will say, I just want to shine a light on one thing, which is I think when athletes build a relationship with Fuelin or whatever program, quite often they enter thinking just about race fueling and how they can perform best in race. But you have always had a broader perspective. So I want to ask you a question around that, because you individually, as an expert, have a long history in world-class nutrition performance across many sports: rowing, ice hockey with the Maple Leafs, professional rugby originally, all sorts of sports. And you entered triathlon via a Purple Patch Pro, Sarah Piampiano. We've talked about that many times, but that was probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And because we're getting older, but
Unfortunately,
but it'd be really interesting, because coming back from Kona, as we start to get into the meat and potatoes of the meat and potatoes, if you can reflect when you first started working with Sarah 6, 7, 8 years ago, and your observations then, where you were brand new to triathlon. You really were, like, you came in, still a world expert, but coming into this sport, and how you felt then, what your observations were in general terms to where we're at now, as it pertains to nutrition, fueling at the professional level. What do you have any changes that you've seen?
well, I think first word that comes to mind is opportunity.
Yeah.
I think there was a huge opportunity, and I actually spoke to Sarah the other day, and it's crazy to think it was 7 years ago. Then we were just reflecting on that journey and reflecting on the journey with you at Fire Station in San Francisco, and you grilling me. Look, I think back then the emergence of we've always known carbohydrates are important.
Yep.
But it's gone in these ebbs and flows. Carbohydrates are important back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Okay, maybe not as high carbohydrate intake as it is today, but certainly carbohydrates were in vogue. Then it shifted. We saw this low carb, high fat sort of, period come through where people got excited and, probably more anecdotal than actually science-based.
Yep.
We then have seen a resurgence and a renaissance sort of
in the last few
carbohydrates.
years, really,
In the
last 2 to
last-
3 years.
correct.
Yeah.
However, back in 2017, there was the research starting to come out. You had individuals like James Morton and whatnot providing these studies who, I certainly admire and look at their research despite being a competitor. I mean, it's science. And so I can look at that science back in 2017 and go, well, there's something to this, isn't there? The body, from a physiological standpoint, can take in way more than 60 grams an hour. Well, why aren't we doing this for those athletes who are pushing that
High
pace?
octane effort.
Exactly, high octane effort. Sarah being one of those athletes. Matt, you came to me. Look, Sarah's inconsistent with her race performance. Day to day, she's inconsistent. She had some health issues around bone stress injuries. She had gut issues. So it was sort of unpicking her, saying, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Okay, let's change your nutritional intake day-to-day, which again, I still look at today and it's extremely frustrating for me for everyone to be so focused on race fueling. It's not that hard. Like, train your gut, work out what your actual requirements are based on energy expenditure and how fast you're going, how hard you're pushing. You can work out grams per hour and train that. But what happens to the day-to-day? And it's like, I don't believe you can just eat crap all the time and get away with it. It will come back to bite you in the bum.
Yep.
So those habits you talk about, those foundations around great quality, vegetables, fruits, good quality proteins, great quality fats, it is super important. That's a really important
every day.
Every day. And that's an important framework. total calories, absolutely crucial,
Mhm.
in line with what you're trying to achieve.
Yep.
Again, not just calories because you can take in as many calories as you want, calories in line with what you require.
Yeah.
Huge energy expenditure, absolutely. Huge calorie intake, not very high calorie intake
Yes.
or expenditure. Maybe you don't need as many calories. And therefore, quality can be even further emphasized because actually total calorie intake doesn't require. So with Sarah, back to the original question, what was the opportunity? Yeah, changing race fueling,
Mhm.
huge opportunity at that time. And we did that. We bumped her from 50, 60 grams an hour up to 100, close to 120 grams an hour for a tiny female athlete.
115 pounds or
Yeah,
so, 120 pounds. Yeah.
that was a huge opportunity. Increasing protein intake at the time. No one was taking in sort of 2 to 3 grams per kilo body weight of protein, and that had a huge impact on her recovery.
Yep.
Increasing her vegetable and fruit intake, improved, I think, from the fiber intake, improved her gut health, FODMAPs. It was only emerging at the time, sort of Monash University in Melbourne and University in Australia, talking about these FODMAPs, these fermentable types of carbohydrates. Did an elimination diet. Instantly, she felt better. She realized she didn't have to remove everything to do with gluten. She didn't have to avoid carbohydrates anymore. So now there was a specificity to her day-to-day nutrition and a specificity to her race fueling, including hydration. And she started to dial it in. You hear about dialing in all the time. I hear it from her, I'm going to dial this in. But she really did dial it in because the nutrition day to day and race fueling was tailored to her. And that all of that became Fuelin.
It was you mentioned me grilling you. I'm not an easy interview, but
You were scary as
well,
hell.
no,
You were scary as hell.
it's my treasure. It was Sarah, and it's important for listeners because we all have short memories, and I want to reflect at the time. You drove Sarah up to and I'll do it in pounds for the American audience, but more than a gram per pound of body weight every day, and
Of protein.
of protein on a day-to-day basis. And at that time, it was just it just felt like so much protein. And then in the racing, then we go to the racing. You were driving her up towards 100 and 120 grams. There's nothing revolutionary about this in 2024. Go back 7 years ago, I felt like I was standing on the edge of the Eiffel Tower looking off, and I had to make a decision: am I going to jump with this guy or not? It was like catching an early wave. It was absolutely crazy. But and I say this was the catalyst of Sarah going from great to world class. I think it really enabled her greatest consistency that she had. She had her best results off of the back of this, and we have seen, and we'll talk about it, the sport really evolve behind this wave. It's been incredibly interesting to see the emergence of this with maybe some parallels of that. So it's been a fascinating journey that I felt like I got a little like into a secret chamber almost, and I saw this and was like, goodness me, this is absolutely crazy. I thought you were crazy. That's why I grilled you so much, because I really wanted to make sure that I felt like you knew what you were talking about. And we went on it, and it's true. And I think many industries are often really positively impacted by external sources. Any sport, and this can be some of the best sports, like the biggest sports in the world, soccer or whatever it is, can get institutionalized. And when you go outside of the sport and have new ideas, sometimes that can often be the unlock. And I think the in the sphere of nutrition, I think that was absolutely the case. Yourself and others brought in this with the research, and it was really fascinating. I want to dive into to Kona specifically. You talked earlier about high octane athletes, and I can't let this go. If I let this go, I'm going to forget about it. There is a huge disconnect in my experience working with a lot of coaches that are coaching athletes, working with a lot of athletes. And we just talked about Sarah consuming 100 grams an hour. I see a lot of confusion with this new sphere of 100, 120, 150 grams an hour. Athletes' natural tendencies and coaching athletes, driving athletes up, 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 up. But it's not always a good thing. And it all comes down to mostly energy expenditure, caloric burn. And I want you to discuss something for the audience that I think is really important, perhaps the most valuable thing that you're going to get out today. Most athletes nowadays ride with power meters. These professional athletes, the male athletes, are averaging more than 300 watts over the course of an Ironman. Female athletes, somewhere between 220, 250 watts over the course of an Ironman. They are expending a lot of calories. And so, therefore, to support their racing performance, they are able to and should consume a lot of calories. How does that change for an athlete that is riding the same distance, but only perhaps producing 120, 150 watts? Can you explain the difference there for coaches that are listening? I think this is a critical piece that is so missed.
Yeah, it's actually something popping up quite frequently for me from coaches and from athletes who are experiencing GI distress,
Yep.
especially on the run and also on the bike. I mean, I think the disconnect here is everyone's seeing on social media and, whatnot that 120 grams an hour is just standard for athletes to do now. And you hear talks of 150, 170 grams an hour. Apparently, there was a lot of rumors flying around. That's what Magnus was going to be taking on. Now, again, if you're pushing 350 watts as an average or normalized power for, 4 hours, like you probably, if you can tolerate it, theoretically, it makes sense. But this disconnect between a coach asking me why is it my female athlete, and I'll talk about female in particular because it's an actual example. Why is my female athlete throwing up? She's only taking in 70 grams an hour. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at power output. Let's look at energy expenditure that is a direct relationship to the power being pushed through the bike. Oh, it's 130 watts. Okay, what does that equate to? Total energy output in terms of calories per hour is around 300 odd calories.
So she's burning over the course of an hour, to be very clear, about 300 calories. So I'm getting my watts and calories all mixed up.
About 300 calories now. Okay, what's 50 grams of carbs per hour? That's around 200 calories.
Yeah.
Or it is 200 calories. That other 100 calories, okay, you've got endogenous stores, liver, muscle, blood, glycogen.
Yeah.
You've also got fat on your body, which you will utilize despite taking in carbohydrates. There's plenty of research and some really cool research showing even intakes of up to 90 grams an hour, you can still have maximal oxidation of fat during periods of time where you take in maximal amounts of carbohydrates.
Exactly. It's not a blocking agent.
It is acutely.
Yeah.
And it can suppress utilization of fat as a fuel source acutely. But once time is extended, you start to use fat as a fuel source because your body's like, I need calories.
Yep.
So thinking about this athlete, 70 grams an hour is above her threshold for requirements. It's not what she needs. And so actually dropping that athlete down to even 40 or 50 grams an hour of carbohydrates, maybe every hour, taking in something like a bar, which might have some protein, some fat, some carbohydrates, breaks up the glucose monotony. That athlete is not world-class. Their relative intensity is still high.
Yep.
So still working at 65% or plus of their VO2 max, or maybe 75% of their max heart rate, whichever one you're looking at. But absolute intensity, 130 watts versus, as you said, female pros pushing 250 watts, 240 watts. There's a big difference in energy expenditure for that athlete. And so again, what it comes down to is understanding how those watts translate to energy expenditure. You can look on your training platform. Training Peaks does it wonderfully. So does Triathlon. It gives you a work value in kilojoules. It gives you a caloric estimation in calories. You can literally do the math if you want to. And of course, at Fuelin, we would work it out for you.
Yeah.
But it's not always more is better.
It's not always more is better. And in addition to that, the game that we are playing, and this is the case in calories and hydration, we're not trying to be net zero. So in other words, we're
Correct.
not trying to directly balance expenditure with consumption.
You will very rarely ever consume or need to consume the exact amount that you're burning and expending.
Yeah.
And that, again, that will probably resolve a lot of GI issues. So yes, a Fuelin, and yes, I am personally very pro carbohydrates.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
However, it's not like just smash carbs for the sake of smashing carbs, much like don't smash calories just for the sake of smashing calories. Have it in context. Context to you as an individual. Work out what you need as an individual through repeated testing. So documenting, again, we call it carb capacity testing, fuel capacity testing, whatever you want to call it. Documenting your session, the type of session, bike, swim, run, the intensity, lower intensity, higher intensity, certainly the higher intensity race-based sessions, the duration, the types of products you took in, what that equates to in terms of total carbohydrates, what that then equates to grams per hour. But most importantly, and again, this is the piece of the puzzle that I think so many athletes and coaches forget, how did you feel?
Yeah, exactly.
How did you feel? We document that. I felt full. I felt heavy. I felt sick. I vomited. I went to the toilet. Do you know what? Okay, it doesn't mean you can't do that again and repeat exactly the same how you felt, how you did. And if actually you get reduced symptoms, that might be a case of, okay, now you're training your
Yeah, the body's
gut,
adapting it.
you're adapting. But if it happens 2 or 3 times, stop hitting your head into the wall. Don't be a hero. Drop the intake down. Oh my God, I didn't feel as heavy. I actually still pushed really good watts, or the watts at which I was being told to push. I didn't vomit. I didn't regurgitate. I didn't do anything in my pants. Okay, maybe a little bit less is actually better for me. And so, yeah, I think it's, look, use the science, use the numbers. Again, we track everything, don't we?
Yep.
I mean, talk about habits and things like that. I mean, tracking sleep. Everyone tracks their sleep these days, and then you ask them, how many hours of sleep do you get? I can think of one person in particular. Oh, I get 6 hours sleep, and it's been 3 years of tracking that, and it's still I'm on 6 hours sleep. Obviously,
Still zero change.
I've digressed from carbohydrates, but same thing. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, you are tracking it, but you're not actually intervening with that, then why bother tracking it?
I think one of the key points that you just talked there as well is the inspiration of pro athletes. If you want to be inspired by a pro, go through the processes they go through. So everything that you talked around with the self-assessment and the tracking and the elements of that, but don't shrink it and pink it. In other words, don't look at them and think Magnus is doing 170 grams, so I should be chasing towards that. And XYZ, Daniela or Taylor Neeb is doing XYZ grams, so therefore that's what I need to try and do because that's what world class do. It's the same with training methodology consistently. It's putting it into context that's important. I want to go specifically. Go ahead.
But on that, don't be surprised though. Not all pros are pros.
Not all pros are pros. Well, yeah.
And I can think of Sarah. You went back. Sarah took it on.
Yeah.
She wanted to learn. She wasn't so pig-headed or big-headed, I should say, that she felt like she knew it all. She was inquisitive.
Yep.
And I will say, I think most of the female athletes I've worked with have been fantastic in terms of they've pushed me.
Yep.
But they've also pushed themselves to learn something new. And unfortunately, there are athletes out there who don't want to listen. And I think that ends up biting them in the bum in the end because you see it happen time and time again with what's going on with them. And I think I think of the athletes that I get to work with at the moment, and they're receptive to new ideas, to testing, to intervening, to assessing. And then it's that team approach with the coach, with the athlete, and with myself. And Holly's a good example. Obviously, congratulations, Holly, for the birth of your little girl. Leading up to that, throughout the experience of working with her, she's inquisitive. We would meet once a week. talk about what's going on, how training's going, what she's eating, is it working? And that's coaching as well. It's
Well,
not just numbers, is it? It's
every
not just numbers.
the highest performer, the champions in life, one of their key character traits is coachability, understanding that they need a team around them, and really effective driving effectiveness in communication, collaboration, feedback, both directions, giving feedback and receiving. And that's exactly what you're endorsing. I want to talk about Kona. You came back.
We got there
I was not there.
eventually.
We got there
We
eventually.
got there eventually.
In the last 5-10 minutes, I just want to have a couple of observations from Kona. First thing that as you were there, was there anything new that came out of this Kona for listeners to keep an eye on, or maybe considering integrating in their own recipe, if you want to call it that? Did you see anything that was interesting?
In terms of like product, or in terms of
Product, nutrition,
technology?
technology, anything. And you can go outside of nutrition if you want here.
I saw some.
Outside of 4 unicorns rather than one.
Yeah, there were 4 unicorns, Fuelin unicorns. No, I didn't actually see anything that was groundbreaking, or I saw some cooling vests that I sort of went, nah,
Yeah.
I wasn't that impressed with that. I saw some interesting setups on the bikes. I noticed
I saw
everyone had the bottle, stacked bottles on top with integrated hydration, certainly for the pros,
Yeah.
which I really like.
creating the aero.
Obviously, there's an aero there. I have heard it's going to be banned, the
Mhm.
bottle on top facing backwards, because it's creating, I think, a bit like the
the
fairing.
bulge, the fairing. Yeah.
So I think that is going to be banned. But if it's not, then certainly it looks advantageous. Certainly Sam Laidlow had that set up on it. What I thought was good about that setup was, I imagine it's fuel in a 1 liter bottle, fuel in the 1 liter bottle underneath that. And then in the integrated system, I imagine is what they're doing is putting water into there.
Yeah.
So they can refill if they can grab a bottle at the aid stations. I certainly saw a lot of missed bottle grabs, which came back to bite some athletes on the bum. But I imagine they're just filling up the integrated system and then carrying 3 liters of fuel within a 1 liter bottle. Theoretically, you could carry 160 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
So I think that was interesting observation. I think using special needs in a race like Kona, I think hindsight, probably fill it with water. And at least if you don't need to use it, don't use it. But if you've missed all the aid stations because they're just not grabbing them, I think having that special needs, or athlete needs as they call it now, certainly would make sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I noticed some cooling pads on aero bars that I saw, gimmick or actionable performance gains to be determined. But the thermoregulators are on the inside arm. It makes theoretical sense. Whether it's practical sense, who knows? But one thing we did notice, and most spectators would have seen this, as it relates to increasing, driving up carbohydrate intake. We saw some really interesting footage of, and there was one in particular, Christian Blumenfeld, but I noticed several athletes over the course of the bike ride projectile vomiting, not just throwing up, projectile vomiting. I've seen all sorts of, over my 20 years of going to Kona, I've seen all sorts of stuff occurring on the run, typically out on the Queen K, later in the races, people throwing up, people coming out the other end, etc. This was early in the bike course. I'm interested from your perspective, how, as a nutrition expert, how do you correlate with that, where an athlete is in the bike relatively early, 2 hours into the bike ride, they're throwing up? Is that a direct cause of nutrition? That's an impossible question to answer. Is it more global? Was it jellyfish things? Was cool conditions driving up the pace? Do you have any perspective on seeing so many athletes throwing up?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to watch, wasn't it, with Christian? And just to be clear, I don't work with Christian, I don't know what was happening with him. Look, he may have had some food poisoning. Never know. He may have eaten something the night before, poor fella, and had a reaction and maybe pushed through in the morning. Jellyfish stings. Apparently, everyone did get stung. I don't know if there's a toxin there that could cause some issues. Did he swallow a heap of seawater?
That's probably a common one in Hawaii.
That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. He swallowed a heap of salt water, and then that's just come back. He's probably tried to consume
His normal caloric
his
intake.
normal caloric intake, which I imagine is quite high. The Norwegians,
Mhm.
from what we hear, is they're consuming very high amounts. Maybe it all just got too much. The pace on the bike at the start was extreme. Extreme in my view. Certainly, Sam and Magnus were pushing the pace, and so to try and, my understanding is to break Christian, like to try and give a distance, and maybe it was just a combination of a few of those or all of them that unfortunately resulted in, yes, I mean, it was vomiting like I've never seen.
Yeah.
And I felt really sorry for him at that point in time. I mean, you never want to see any athlete or any competitor struggling like that. And, it's going to be a long day when the very start of the race you're doing that. And I just felt for him at that point in time. So, yeah, I mean, was it intake of carbohydrates? I don't believe so. I'd imagine he would have trained taking in large volumes of carbohydrates on the bike at that similar intensity along the way. So I imagine there was something else. So
it's probably that on top of whatever the other factors.
Whatever
And
the other
another
factors
factor
were.
could be as well, by the way, that we haven't mentioned is going in just a little bit fatigued as well. And
Yeah, possibly.
that has a huge component in Hawaii in that environment typically. And I'm not suggesting it is that. I'm not saying they got their training recipe wrong. I'm just, it could be that. It can be sickness. It can be consuming of too much seawater. It could be it could be food poisoning, as you say. So
Temperature was pretty cool on the
Yeah.
bike as well at the start. I mean, it was raining at one point in the morning.
Yeah.
So whether the athletes really pushed it because they thought it was going to be a cool day, and then as we saw, it really heated up. I mean, it was a fairly typical Kona day in the end, but super humid, super hot when they got to the run. And you saw, Benny Canute, who I work with, I mean, he pushed the bike really hard. He had a great bike race, but in the end it cooked him.
Yep.
It cooked Sam Laidlow. It cooked a lot of them.
Just a lot of them.
Magnus, fair play to him. He looked down and out and came back strong. And to finish second after that, that bike was pretty incredible. So.
It really was. I tell you something, the more things have evolved, the more things they stay the same. And Hawaii delivered. It's a very similar recipe. Although I will say my perspective, and I've got one more question for you on the Kona show here, but I do remember several years ago. I'm not working with professional athletes anymore, but I remember probably 7 or 8 years ago, I said to our group of pros at the time, particularly the male athletes, I said, we need to start evolving rapidly here. And the train is leaving the station. And I gave them probably this speech 2 or 3 times. The sport is evolving, and there is going to be greater depth and greater performance levels than you can even imagine right now. Half Ironman distance, everything is changing. And the train left the station. And what we saw in Hawaii was really what we've seen across the T100 race experience. If you look at the level of the racing there, it is absolutely staggering. What Martin Van Riel and the other cast of characters in that racing performance. The sport has evolved, and it's very, very difficult for the folks in 2017, 18 that were top 5 in the world that to up level now the performance levels. And what we see in there, folks riding under 4 hours, folks riding 2:30s off the bike. It is staggering. And I do remember Patrick Langer saying, I think I can go 7.5 hours, and everyone laughed in his face there. And he went 7:35. That is a performance sea change that we've seen. When you go back to 2009, Chris Lieto, an athlete that I coached, 8:08, whatever it was, and everyone was like, goodness me, can anyone ever go under 8 hours? And here we are.
And 19 of them went under 8
19 under 8 hours. So,
and just on that though, like Camworth, like
mastery.
You talk about someone who has adapted and just kept pushing, and he is an Aussie, obviously, I'm very proud of. And I said, I think he's going to run himself into 5th, and I got laughed at Kona. He didn't obviously get to 5th, he got to 7th, but I mean, extraordinary. And yeah, they, again, like, look at Jan even, like, last year with Milwaukee.
Yeah,
no one counted him in. He's 41 years of age, but he was willing to adapt to what he was seeing, which was at that point in time, well, maybe I need some carbs. He'd never used carbs to the extent that we pushed. And he was willing to change his approach to adapt to what he was seeing. Lo and behold, it ends up working.
It's great.
And I'm sure, like, I don't know Cam, I don't work with Cam, but he is clearly evolving as an athlete and adapting because he's 41.
It's an incredible performance by him. And I will say, I'll make a little joke.
Incredible.
But, he's with Ineos. And Ineos, they've got 3 soccer teams that are all middle of the tables and not doing well. They just got stuffed in the American club. Their performance levels of the All Blacks team, which is the worst All Blacks team ever. Team Sky used to be a great cycling team. They're no longer great. And he has emerged despite that mediocrity. So that guy,
I'll let you say that.
I'm joking, Cam. I have the greatest respect for you and what you've done. And by the way, he is a man that came out of rowing, Olympic rowing. He's had an incredible journey, professional cyclist. One of the great icons, I think so. How to be a professional athlete across so much time. It's fantastic. So I'm very much joking.
Inspirational. Yeah, I don't know him, but I find his story inspirational.
He's wicked smart, very funny, and knows how to be a professional athlete. It's great. So, Scott, thank you very much. We are going to talk about in part 2 coming up in our next show. We're going to actually broaden the perspective and talk a little bit around creating a bedrock and foundation of great nutritional habits to drive you into your next performance over the course of 2025. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're looking for improved body composition, or whether you're looking to boost your daily productivity and longevity quality of life for your years ahead. So that is in part 2. We will see you then.
Thanks, mate.
Take care. Bye. Guys, thanks so much for joining and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends. And it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience. And we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.